Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to take a look at the astrology of the month of November 2023. Now, this is going to see Saturn go direct on the 4th, but did you know in traditional astrology, Saturn is known as the Greater Malefic, but the Lesser Malefic, Mars, is also very much central to this month's developments. It's a very exciting month to share with you. You can also check out your deep dive individual zodiac forecast for each of the 12 signs from Aries through to Pisces, which you can relate to in terms of your sun or ascendant by seeing the link beneath this video for each of those individual clips. If you're new to my channel, it's lovely to have you with us. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please do share them. I try to interact with as many comments as possible. If you're a returning visitor, it's lovely to have your company. Please do like, share, comment or subscribe. And your support is really sincerely appreciated. Now, with year 2024 rushing towards us, if you'd like to get your forecast for next year, your transits, which is how the moving planets in the sky are interacting with your individual natal birth chart, which creates an effect which will be totally unique to you, please see the link beneath this video where you can order this, but also in my special package get 30% off your life roadmap, your character analysis, gain serial insights into the patterns that have played out in your life so far, and get a much more intimate understanding of how you can work with them. Please see the link below for more. So as we burst into November 2023, there's a big lineup of Scorpio energy. So Scorpio season very much in flow. The Sun, Mercury and Mars, its traditional ruler. But let's not forget that partial lunar eclipse in the sign of Taurus, which occurred across the 28th, 29th of October, because that's still pouring its energy into this month. And we're going to feel that very intensely, I feel. And what we're being asked to do is to try to get a sense of our values, our personal values, but our self-worth, but also in understanding how that relates to our connections to others, which is the Scorpio energy. Now, of course, in a more practical context, it can be about money. Taurus energy, everyday money. Scorpio energy, much more to do with the longer term investments, anything to do with shares, savings, insurance policies, legacies, and so forth. So the first week of this month really amps up that lunar eclipse energy furthermore, because although Jupiter and Mars were in opposition on that event, it's Jupiter in an opposition with the Sun in the first week, and that's exact on the 3rd. Now, obviously, Jupiter, for its rulership of Pisces, can be quite spiritual, but its host, Taurus, slows down the more expansive energies of Jupiter in a good way, because the Jupiterian energies that come through Sagittarius can sometimes promise a bit more than it can deliver. But I feel that what this is going to do, this particular aspect, is amp up desire, our passion. What is it that's really triggering our desire to be invested in some way, to feel a sense of excitement where we really are getting something back from all the energy we're outputting? But also, the first week of this month sees a very idealistic opposition between Venus, not so good in Virgo, where of course it's in fall, but it's in opposition with Neptune, the ruler of Pisces. And that's very, very dreamy, drifty, but could be quite magical if you met someone and there was that mesmeric connection that can come from Scorpio energy and the sensuality from that Taurus energy, perhaps over a meal. You get talking to someone, if the energy is really gripping you at a physical level, your values are aligning, but you also feel there's something almost intangible that is pulling you together. It's a very mystical influence. Now, of course, Neptune can also be the trickster. So if we do meet someone and it is passion central, we need to be aware of what our needs are, what the other person's needs are, but also what the terms of reference are. Otherwise, we could end up amping up our expectations to then be quite disappointed. But also in the first week of this month, there is the opposition between Mercury and Uranus, which is a very electric energy. Could even be a little bit erratic. So when it comes to desire, which is very strong at the start of this month, and Mercury about how we think, but in the sign of Scorpio, it's very much got its detective's mac on. It hears information, but really likes to decipher what it really means. But the speed at which Uranus provokes discussion, sometimes in a disruptive way, sometimes in a way which is pushing us to engage with the higher truth of the situation, but because both signs are fixed, there can be some resistance. Fixed energy likes stability. It's not so flowy. Now we get the flowy energy from Venus and Neptune, but the Sun and Jupiter and Mercury and Uranus, they're fixed. So the desire to expand or make snap decisions, which can happen with Uranus because it is very triggering, could see some disagreements as well, particularly if we encounter someone who's very demanding and desirous of what they want, but they're not as attuned to perhaps what we want. So finding that midpoint around desires and needs is really important, but it's also very important to understand our motivations. Now, crucially, on the 4th, Saturn ends its retrograde, which began on the 17th of June. Now, I'm going to do a special on the Saturn retrograde coming to an end, but essentially since then, depending on your zodiac sign, because it's in the sign of Pisces, let's think about the energy of Saturn. Saturn is about structures, so when it moved into Pisces on the 7th of March, it's asking us to have a more structural approach to the more spiritual, emotional and psychological parts of our situations. Also, the sign of Pisces is the culmination sign, but Saturn is much more to do with the physical world, and Pisces, that less tangible, more ethereal dimension. So what Saturn's been asking us to do is to try to box in some of the very dreamy, drifting and hard to define, shapeless energies almost of Pisces into something more tangible. And so, for example, if you're someone who is a little bit reluctant to look at your vulnerabilities or your anxieties, Saturn's been pushing us to work at those areas and not feel a sense of disassociation. Now, if you're someone who's very much into personal development, healing, natural medicine, taking responsibility for who you are, understanding the patterns that play out around this part of your situation, Saturn will be an asset over the next couple of years. So it's where we're resisting, but depending on what zodiac sign, I think it's true to say that for a lot of us there has been some very draining situations. And part of the reason for this is, of course, we've had a series of planets going through the sign of Virgo, which have been facing up to Saturn, but also we've had planets going through the sign of Gemini and also squaring up with not just Saturn but also Neptune. So that's why I feel energy has been very, very low for a lot of people. So Saturn going direct on the 4th is something to really, really appreciate for sure. Now, also, as this month goes on, Saturn is still going to potentially be a bit tricky, and I will explain that, but we have a great situation on the 8th because Venus returns to the sign of Libra. Now, in Libra, Venus can really thrive. Here it's looking to find harmony, that midpoint between how we see it, the other person sees it. It's about celebrating the things we have in common rather than focusing on what makes us different. Of course, Venus in Libra can be a little bit superficial. It prefers things to be on an even keel, doesn't really like tension and conflict so much, but what it can bring is the love language that can be useful to diffuse tension. So more diplomatic language is available to all of us. And if we are looking to take that passionate connection that we might have with someone, or that brilliant business idea, because remember Venus can be about money as well for its rulership of Taurus, if we wanted to take something on from that electric, intense, thrusting energy at the start of this month, but actually make it work in some kind of situation, we're probably going to have to work in some kind of way with someone else. And Venus can be such a great asset in this regard. But Mercury also switches out of Scorpio on the 10th and moves into the sign of Sagittarius. Now it's going to be here through to the end of the month, but it is coming back for the last 10 days of year 2023, because we have the first taste of the Mercury Fire retrograde series, which is going to dominate year 2024. This year it's all Earth apart from that last 10 days. So Mercury in the sign of Sagittarius, let's think about this. So Mercury rules Gemini, which is opposite Sagittarius, but it also rules the sign of Virgo, which is at 90 degrees, a square. So Mercury isn't said to be at its best in Sagittarius, said to be detrimented. But I kind of like Mercury in the ninth house. Some of the deep ideas and the analytical experiences we've had with Mercury in the sign of Scorpio can now be more emerging and more outgoing. So Mercury in the sign of Sagittarius is brilliant if you're thinking about doing a course online, or wanting to travel, or you wanted to expand your experiences in some kind of way, your thinking. You could also see an opportunity to work on contracts, come into contact with anything to do with civil liberties, particularly with Venus in the 7th house of Libra, Mercury in the 9th. So the whole concept of social justice is going to become much more universal with everyone. But there's a catch, because from the 10th through to the 12th, Mercury immediately clashes with the restrictive energies of Saturn. So what we can get is the more expansive energies of Sagittarius, which is of course ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter likes it big and not so keen on the details, which Mercury through Virgo really needs, and tangible results. Chatty Mercury through Gemini is quick conversations, but if we try to embrace some kind of big picture or philosophy, what Saturn is saying is, how does it feel? So immediately Saturn applies somewhat of a break. But what Mercury can do, and it's going to be followed by the Sun and Mars later this month, is expand, but perhaps exaggerate, and Saturn can limit in some way. So we still need to work with Saturn. Just because Saturn's gone forward, it's not a panacea. We still need to work understanding the benefits of Saturn in Pisces, even if it can be hard going. But on the 13th, we have a glorious event, because there's a new moon in Scorpio, but it's a new moon which is pretty close to Mars, the traditional ruler of this sign. So this is going to be a fantastically energizing event. And Mars, through its rulership of Scorpio, is very much about instant gratification. It is about really wanting to satisfy our yearnings. Perhaps in blunter language, our lust. Whether it's lust for a material item, a bit of luxury, an intimate encounter, but whatever we want, we're wanting it, and we're wanting it bad. But I feel that this new moon could be a good counterpoint in some ways to the energy of the lunar eclipse of the 28th, 29th of October, because the more scorpionic side of that event was obviously challenged because the moon's opposite the sun. They represent two different things. They're the mother and father of the heavens, if you think about it, and they weren't on good terms. But now they're more integrated. Now we know the moon in Scorpio is in its full, so it's not its best location. But I think the fact that Mars is there could add some volatility, but it certainly can add some desire. So think about whatever it is you really desire. You know, whether it is a big ticket item, you're really going to find that revs up within you. But also from the 18th through to the 20th, the Sun sextiles to Pluto, and of course Pluto is the higher octave modern ruler of the sign of Scorpio, and this is a wonderful opportunity to transform. So although we can think about the sign of Scorpio as being very much sexual or material through finance, it can have a deeply mystical implication in our situations, because it can be about transformations. So with Pluto then adding its power to the mix, whether we're transforming ourselves at an internal level or in our physical world, some big shifts in a very positive way are possible. But on the 22nd, the Sun powers into Sagittarius. But on the 24th, it's joined by Mars. The catch, though, is once again Saturn. So Saturn's laying in wait, squaring up to both of these ingresses. So the Sun moving into Sagittarius is really adding to Mercury's magic in terms of pushing us to be more adventurous, independent, questioning. It of course is a mutable sign, so after all that fixed energy, we might appreciate breaking out, doing something that's lighter. There could be quite a lot of developments on the international stage, I would say. Now obviously, because Mars is in the mix, and Mars can be very warlike, and for example when the Gaza Strip situation began, Mars and Pluto were in a square, so the two rulers of Scorpio were actually not on good terms, and that actually is a classic aggressive influence. So we have Mars moving into the 9th house, which could see a lot more passion about the principles in a situation. It may see more international tensions in some ways, but it's really encouraging us in our personal lives to be more physically active, to be more inquisitive, to download more information, and to really embrace that part of our nature which is very much about freedom and enjoying new experiences, spontaneity. So all that intensity of Scorpio is making way-ish because Mars is still in the mix, and that's the ruler, of course, of that sign. But you know, from the 25th to the 30th, I mentioned before that Neptune had been just as complex as Saturn this year. Well, Mercury goes into a square with Neptune. If you are looking to travel anywhere, you really do need to examine the small print in terms of visas and inoculations or whatever else. Something could be a bit tricky there. I would say that's a potentially quite difficult influence. If we were talking, for example, to someone about a legal matter, we'd really need to keep our wits about us, but just as equally if we're buying something online. But that brings us to the last week. The Sun is conjunct Mars, but then we have the full moon in the buzzy, quick-moving sign of Gemini. But it's in a T-square with Saturn. So the moon in Gemini is very rational, quick-witted, but detached from emotion. We have Mars on the opposite side of the heavens, closely linked to the Sun, which is kind of saying, look, this is my belief, and I feel very fired up and passionate about these beliefs. But Saturn is hidden in a way in the watery sort of marshlands of Pisces, where it's watchful, and maybe it's going to teach us all a lot more lessons in each of our lives about our emotional relationships, about our vulnerabilities, our anxieties, maybe the issues to do with anything to do with flooding and pollution in waters is going to become an even more of a hot topic, very, very possible, because of course Saturn can be about structures and the sign of Pisces can be about the lack of them. So we could see more ice melting, more flooding, more emotional energy that's not really bound up in any kind of way, and then the expressive, quick-witted energies of Gemini. So here it's very much about quick ideas competing with higher truths and philosophies. And sometimes we all say what we perhaps just think of in that moment, which can be very much like a Gemini full moon, whereas because the Mars is applying to the Sun, that's feeling very intense about the principles around something. Don't say that, that's very frivolous, but then Saturn's there lurking, perhaps catching us out. So we get caught up in a big discussion at the end of this month over a point of principle, perhaps with a sibling, perhaps with a neighbour, the third house. Perhaps it is over a legal matter, something to do with an agreement, judgment, justice, the sign of Sagittarius. But Mars is there very impatient, but Saturn in a square with Mars creates an enormous amount of frustration. In a natal horoscope, people with that aspect often have to do quite physical jobs in order to feel that they're getting something from their connection to life. They need to test themselves out in some kind of very physical way. So could be a trooper in the army, for example, or someone who is a demolition expert. It could be someone who might want to do something to do with the discipline of physical exercise, but in a way that has some kind of upside. So, for example, becoming very good at martial arts, for example. But of course, the square can create frustration, limitation, and at times explosive energy. So I feel that when it comes to politics, the news cycle, international affairs, that's quite potentially an unstable alliance at the end of this month. But I also feel that there are real opportunities with Mars applying to the Sun in the latter part of this month to remind all of us of the need to stay in touch with a need to keep mindful of our need to be independent. There's nothing wrong with having close and intimate relationships. It's the most probably nurturing and wonderful thing in life, but sometimes we have to just reconnect with our individual identities. So that could be taking a walk in the country, going for a hike, maybe doing some rugged sport, or really taking an idea and having the confidence to really go for it in that very Jupiterian, Sagittarius, expansive way. So that gives you a little bit of a flavour for this month. But remember, you can get your deep dive for each of the 12 signs by clicking on the link below. And for now, it's been a real pleasure being with you. I'm wishing you all the best. And please, if you can, like, comment, share, or subscribe.